Good morning. In today's lecture, we'll be looking into the poem Spelling by Margaret Atwood. This is an image of a poet. So let's begin. Margaret Atwood was born in Ottawa, Canada. So Margaret Atwood was born on 1939 and where? In Ottawa, which is in Canada. As a child, she spent much of her time in the backwoods of northern Quebec, which happened to be the site of her father's research in forest entomology. So during her childhood, she spent much of her time in the backwoods of northern Quebec. Her father was a researcher in forest entomology, and the backwoods of northern Quebec was a site of research. Entomology is the study of insects, and forest entomology means the study of forest insects, that is, those insects which feed on or do damage to trees. She published her first collection of poems, Double Persephone, in 1961. So Double Persephone is her first collection of poems. And when was it published? It was published in 1961. The Circle Game, published in 1966, Animals in That Country 1967, and Morning in That Barn House are some of her major poetic works. Atwood's first novel, The Edible Woman, was published in 1969, followed by her widely read novel Surfacing 1972 and Lady Oracle, published in 1977. So, which is Atwood's first novel? Thus, The Edible Woman. And when was it published? It was published in 1969. An ardent feminist concerned with survival, she projects the dilemma of the oppressed woman, especially the Canadian woman, caught between manacles of power relations and identity crisis. So, she depicts the dilemma of oppressed woman, especially Canadian woman, power relationsനിടയിൽപ്പെട്ടതും identity crisis face ചെയ്യുന്നതുമായ women. Atwood's poetry is characterized by the vivid precision of her language and the power of imagery. Imagery യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നതും ലാംഗ്വേജ് ആക്യുറേറ്റ് ആയിട്ട് യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നതും ആറ്റ്വുഡിന്റെ പോയട്രിയുടെ ഒരു ഫീച്ചറാണ്. The central theme of many of her poems is freedom of articulation and the frustration emerging from its denial. ആറ്റ്വുഡിന്റെ പോയട്രിയുടെ സെൻട്രൽ തീം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഫ്രീഡം ഓഫ് ആർട്ടിക്കുലേഷൻ, അതായത് ടു എക്സ്പ്രസ് വൺസ് ഓൺ ഐഡിയാസ് ആൻഡ് ഫീലിംഗ്സ് എന്നതാണ്. അത് നിരസിക്കപ്പെടുമ്പോഴുള്ള ഫ്രസ്ട്രേഷനുമാണ് ആറ്റ്വുഡിന്റെ മിക്ക പോയംസിന്റെയും സെൻട്രൽ തീം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ആറ്റ്വുഡ് rails against the confinements experienced by a woman writer in a hostile environment in Notes Towards a Poem That Cannot Be Written. അപ്പോൾ Notes Towards a Poem That Cannot Be Written ആറ്റ്വുഡ് ഒരു വുമൻ റൈറ്റർ എതിർപ്പുള്ള ഒരു ഹോസ്റ്റൈൽ എൻവയോൺമെന്റിൽ എങ്ങനെ ആ അതിരുകൾക്കെതിരെ പോരാടുന്നു എന്നതാണ് മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. Spelling is another poem which serves as a testament to the power of words, and it depicts the victimization of women who are denied access to it. So, the poem that we have to learn is Spelling, and it depicts the power of words and the victimization or unjust treatment of women who are denied of words. She describes her daughter's first attempts to spell and takes the reader through the history of persecuted, helpless women. So this poem, we could see that Atwood describes her daughter's first attempt to spell, and also through this poem, she tells the readers the history of the persecuted or the ill-treated women who were helpless. The poem, which is a fine fusion of the personal, political and lyrical, is an exploration into the depths of human consciousness. In Spelling, we could see the fusion of personal, political and lyrical. So this poem is also an exploration or search into the depths of what? Human consciousness. So now let's begin the poem. My daughter plays on the floor with plastic letters red, blue, and hard yellow, learning how to spell, spelling how to make spells. The poet begins the poem with the words, "My daughter plays on the floor." So the daughter who is referred here is Atwood's daughter, Eleanor Jess Atwood, who was born in 1976. Here we could see that the poet is using the word daughter instead of child. This signifies that the poem is about motherhood. The poet says that her daughter is playing with plastic letters that are red, blue, and hard yellow. We know that red, blue, and yellow are the primary colors. That is, these colors are the building blocks of other colors. Here, we could say that this indicates the fact that her daughter is learning the basics of life. In the next lines, we could see the poet using the words how to spell, spelling, and how to make spells. So the daughter learns how to spell, and then she learns the spelling of the words. That is, she learns to read and write, and then she learns how to make spells. Make spells refer to witchcraft. It is said that in the old days, women were considered as witches as they cast spell on men. So let's look in the next stanzas. I wonder how many women denied themselves daughters, closed themselves in rooms, drew the curtains, so they could mainline words. A child is not a poem is not a child. There is no either or, however. In this stanza, the poet says that women have to deny their daughters and close themselves in rooms. For what? In order to write. This indicates the problems that the educated women faced. This can also be interpreted as society does not allow women to write, and thus they have to close themselves in rooms, or else they have to hide their identity as women and write. Motherhood is also a problem for them. Either they could write or nourish their children. So for women, these writers, that is the women writers, they have to struggle between their profession and motherhood. So let's go on the next stanza. I return to the story of the woman caught in the war and in labor, her thighs tied together by the enemy so she could not give birth. Ancestress, the burning witch, her mouth covered by leather, to strangle words, a word after a word is power. In this stanza, the poet is probably talking about the Holocaust, in which the women were captured, tortured, raped, and ultimately these women were made to abort children, or their legs were tied for what? To prevent birth, and this action ultimately led to their death. Figuratively, this could mean that the voice of educated women that the society cannot bear is killed. In the line, Ancestress, the burning witch, the poet may be referring to Mary Webster, who was accused of witchcraft. Because of what? She tried to raise her voice. Mary Webster's mouth was covered by leather. It was in order to strangle her words. She was saved, but tortured by men of the age continued throughout her whole life. Atwood tells the history not conventionally but morally. We could see the poet gives light to the shared experience of oppression that has survived throughout the ages. According to the poet, the words of all females are power together. In other words, what could we say? It is literacy that makes women powerful, and it is this power that men throughout the ages are trying to suppress. The next stanzas. At the point where language falls away, from the heart bounds at the point where the rock breaks open and darkness flows out of it like blood. At the melting point of granite, when the bones know they are hollow and the bud splits and doubles and speaks the truth and the body itself becomes a mouth. This is a metaphor. In this stanza, Atwood presents the harsh reality of the condition of women in society. According to her, the bodies of women who were considered as witches were burnt along with their powerful words. The imagination of these women flowed like blood when their bodies erupted like rocks in a volcano. When these bonds become hollow or when the ideas of the women were killed, the bonds actually represent the sufferings of women, and the bonds themselves become mouths and spoke out words. These bonds act as a metaphor for the suppressed talents of women. So the final stanzas. How do you learn to spell blood, sky, and the sun? Your own name first, your first naming, your first name, your first word. So in the last stanza, the poet asks, how do you learn to spell? In a literary perspective, spell means putting letters to form names, and in a metaphorical perspective, it means to enchant or convey impressions. The poet asks, how do they spell and identify the things like blood, sky, and sun? In the end, we could see her saying that no one can name himself though male or female. The repetition of the word first may be suggesting Atwood's hope to formulate a purely female language. In the book of Genesis in Bible, it is Adam who enjoys the privilege of naming. And here, what we could see is that our poet is dreaming of women enjoying the status of naming. Thank you.